The debate has come and gone, so what happens next? Team Rising is here to weigh in on whether what happened will actually change anything.
We are back with Joe McClain, Democratic strategist, and Inez Stepman, senior policy analyst at the Independent Women's Forum. Inez, I'll start with you. I mean, do you think, I haven't seen the ratings yet. I suspect they were fairly low, given the proximity to Christmas, given the fact that every debate, the ratings have gone down. But do you think that there were any moments, do you think there were any candidates who benefited or who were hurt by the dynamics last night?
I don't think Elizabeth Warren did particularly well again, which I think
agree.
just kind of compounds that narrative of her sliding back. You know, obviously Pete was in the hot seat this debate. I think he did better than Warren did last time in his position, i.e. people gunning for him. I mean, I don't know still what his chances are going forward, but he still looks good in Iowa, and he still looks like he has a chance. But again, this really reminds me of 2012. Every one of those candidates is going to take the turn in the hot seat, and at the end of the day, if that's the dynamic that plays out, you're going to end up with Joe Biden.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I've been using that analogy since you made it. I think it's brilliant. What do you think, Joe?
No, I think I agree with you. I completely agree with you. And I think that Elizabeth Warren looked angry, and Bernie Sanders looked angry. And there's so much anger now in American politics that I think people, as I said before, are worn out with it. I think the people who aren't red-hot Trump supporters, who are angry at everything Trump is angry about, are tired of all the angry and the vitriol in American politics.
And yet, though, Joe, they make up the majority of the
70% of Americans are angry, too. I mean, I think there are a lot of people out there who want to feel that channel. I mean, frankly, you know, I thought Joe Biden had his best debate last night of the cycle, and he was a little angry. And that was what he was more forceful. He was more aggressive in making his case. He went back and forth with Bernie on health care. You know, obviously I support Bernie's position. I thought they both had a good exchange there, but Biden came out and looked very strong. I also disagree on the Pete point. I thought he was utterly exposed as inexperienced, as out of touch, as kind of a fraud. The distance between his I'm just a folksy small town mayor and him in the wine cave is quite jarring. And even more than that, though, Amy Klobuchar, who is not my candidate, I thought she had a good night. And I think the pundits loved her. She had a really strong shot at Mayor Pete. And she and Pete share the same pool of voters. So if she comes up, it's going to come at Pete's expense. Meanwhile, you got Bloomberg in the race with tons of money eaten into some of that margin, too. My personal prediction is that you will see a splintering of that sort of white, affluent, liberal vote among Warren, Pete, and Amy that effectively neutralizes Pete in those early states.
So one of the things is I think the attack has to come with somebody with credibility on that issue, and a lot of the attacks against Mayor Pete came from Elizabeth Warren, and I think that he did a good job fending them off vis-a-vis her by saying, hey, you don't pass any of these things either, right? Especially on that wine cave thing, he pointed out that she had moved all that money over from the Senate campaign.
Very fairly,
and that's a fair
that's
point.
a fair shot,
And he also said, by the way, I am the poorest person on this stage. You guys are criticizing me for this, but I'm not a millionaire, and you guys all are. So I thought that even though some of those attacks did draw blood, if I compare him to Elizabeth Warren's performance in that last debate where she was the rising star and the person who was bouncing up in the polls, I don't think it totally killed his momentum.
The one that I thought, I agree with you, I thought that was basically a draw between him and Elizabeth Warren on that exchange, because he's right. She decided to stop taking the big money when she decided to run for president, and that's a legitimate critique for him to make. I thought Amy was the one who really drew blood when he tried to pull the, you know, I won in Mike Pence's Indiana. And she said, you didn't win in Mike Pence's Indiana. You lost by 20 points when you ran statewide. And he had no response.
He had no response, Joe.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. But I will say two things. First of all, I run campaigns for 30 years, and Democratic liberal campaigns for 30 years. And we always poll on money in politics, and it always comes up 80% against money in politics. And it never matters. Voters just don't
But here's why it didn't. Hold on. But here's why it never mattered. Because they were all hypocrites. You couldn't make a distinction because they were all in the freaking wine cave. I mean, we played Gavin Newsom earlier saying, we've had hundreds of Democratic candidates in the wine cave. I'm like, that's the problem. Now you actually have at least one candidate in Bernie Sanders who can say legitimately, I don't do this, and guess what? I'm raising more money than any of you people, so what's your excuse?
You don't think it was an effective attack when he called out his
billionaires thing?
It's not an effective attack because at the end of the day, the voters won't vote on it. They won't vote on Bernie for that. They'll vote on health care and education
Here's the
and
thing,
jobs.
though. It makes him look like a hypocrite. Because here he is talking about a new generation, a different kind of politics, and there you are in the wine cave with all these other freaking people doing the same old.
And Inez, I mean, Trump did this to a certain extent on the stage. He was like, I've bought all of you people. I donated money to you. I mean, that was part of why people voted for him. They were like, look, he knows how the system works. He's bought them, so he'll run it better than them.
And he's a billionaire, so he doesn't need their money.
So I would reject I don't think it's money in politics per se. I think it's about a systemic critique.
I agree that it's systemic, and actually I agree with Crystal here.
Yeah.
You can mark that down on that.
It's happened before.
I think it's the same thing as what's happening with Trump and the impeachment, right? Which is that America thinks that there's such a background level of corruption that unless there's a contrast being drawn, a very sharp contrast in an authentic way, they dismiss it, right? So the same thing, like a lot of people dismiss the phone call that Trump had because they think, you know what, everybody in Washington has done that and worse.
Yes.
And I think when you have somebody who can draw a contrast on that issue, then I think it matters more than it might in a typical election. So I actually agree with you. I think having somebody on the stage, whether that's Bernie or Andrew Yang, who can say, you know, I raise money in a different way, I'm a different kind of candidate, and actually have that seem authentic and real, I think that does matter. I don't know if it's specifically money. I think it's broad corruption. I think
corruption, hypocrisy.
They think that DC is corrupt, and they're not wrong.
Yeah,
The
I know.
people are not wrong.
I actually don't necessarily disagree with that, although I don't think people will vote on it regardless of who the messenger is. I also think that Buttigieg's message about money, that you can't, if you want to win and if electability is important, you can't take a knife to a gunfight. So you got to take the money wherever you can get
but here's
it. And
the thing.
it is true.
But that rings hollow when Bernie Sanders is raising more money than anyone.
And Elizabeth Warren.
The real problem is not with the Federal Election Campaign Act. Nobody can take more than $2,800 from any individual. The real problem is with soft money, dark money. It's Citizens United. That's the real problem. And if we want to get to it, to solve the problem in American politics, that's where we have to go.
But here's
not individual contributions.
Access is the issue. And this is the thing that he didn't want to deal with last night. It's not that you are taking contributions from wealthy individuals. Bernie Sanders doesn't have any billionaires, but he has wealthy individuals who have contributed to him. It's the access. It's that these are the people who have your ear. These are the people whose phone calls you're going to answer when you're president. These are the people who are going to be ambassadors and get all those kinds of goodies.
Right.
That's the issue more so than exactly who you're taking from.
Okay, think about this, Crystal. $2,800 won't necessarily buy you access to the Oval Office. But $1 million contribution to a dark money campaign absolutely will.
Right. But you know what?
That's
bundling $1 million of $2,800 will also get you an access to the Oval Office.
Sure it will. No, I don't disagree with that at all. All I'm saying is the real problem in American politics today isn't necessarily the money. In fact, we should have this debate at another time, too, where we can really explore it. But because there are a lot of people who, and I'm one of them, who believe the problem is not that there's too much money in politics. The problem is there's not enough in the right places.
Which is why I think Bernie Sanders has been a real pioneer in getting warehouse workers, Walmart workers, teachers distributed across the country.
The problem is accountability. Well, let me just finish this one thought. Let me finish this one thought. The real problem is accountability in messaging, right? I have always said, and this is now dated, but I've always said that if George W. Bush had been forced to stand up in front of the camera and say, I'm George Bush and I approve this message, you would have never had swift voting in that election. You can't have blatant lies broadcast to the American public if the candidate themselves have to take the blame or the credit or responsibility for that. That's the problem with dark money.
Well, I obviously have a very different perspective on this, and I do support Citizens United, but for legal reasons and free speech reasons, because I don't think there's a principled way to make a distinction between printing thousands and thousands of pamphlets of common sense, right? And broadcasting your message. If you're talking about issues, it's very, very. I don't know. I think that distinction is not clear, and I think that's why the Supreme Court has gone where it has. That being said, I agree with you that we overestimate how much money actually is in politics. We spend more money on Pepsi as Americans than we do on our entire electoral, like even in a big presidential cycle. So even though these numbers, yeah, I know, it's only okay. I
Coke
hear it's
is
only
obviously
okay.
better.
Yeah, Coke
They're
is
not
better.
paying me. I'm just
Killing
telling
our
you.
sponsorship.
We spend more money on soda.
Yeah.
Just for perspective of how much money. But I think actually the background corruption, whether or not that's the issue, I see this as very Jacksonian era. We are looking at Washington, D.C., and we're seeing a lot of back scratching and a lot of access, and the whole Hunter Biden story plays into it, but there's equivalent things on the Republican side.
Everybody does it.
That is the problem.
And yet, we have 2 billionaires in the race. Michael Bloomberg, in the first 20 days of his campaign, spending $100 million. And by the way, surprise, surprise, is rising in the polls. So the money, look, may not buy you the nomination. We say this all the time, but it's going to get you something.
All right. Thank you, guys.
I appreciate you
Really
guys.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Make sure to join us next week. There's plenty on tap for the holiday week. Host of the Tim Black Show, Tim Black, is going to be here. The Hill's editor-in-chief, Bob Cusack, he ponders whether candidate Joe Biden can hold on. Former health insurance executive Wendell Potter is going to make the case for Medicare for All. And Dr. Joe Pesch tells us what it's like to live on Mars.
And Michael Brooks will be here. Senator Bernie Sanders' chief advisor, David Sirota, is going to join us. Jimmy Dore is going to tell us who he will endorse in 2020. And friend of the show, end of all Patrick, senior advisor Don Calloway, he's going to tell us about the real importance of South Carolina in the 2020 race. So we have lots of things stacked up for you. Appreciate you guys. Enjoy.